The United Nations has called on the United States of America to reverse labeling of Yemen's Houthi rebels as terrorists. Top UN officials have warned that the labeling would push the country into a large-scale famine and chill peace efforts in the region. US designated Yemen's Houthis a foreign terrorist organization last week. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced the move against the Iran-aligned Houthis, which will come into effect on the 19th of January. UN Yemen mediator Martin Griffiths, UN aid chief Mark Lowcock and UN food chief David Beasley issued their warnings during a UN Security Council meeting on Yemen. UN food chief David Beasley in fact said that this designation needs to be reassessed, re-evaluated and reversed.
In fact, I'm pleased to say that in 2020, the United States stepped up to the World Food Program with $3.75 billion worth of support. And I'm very grateful for that. But this designation, it needs to be reassessed, it needs to be reevaluated, and quite frankly, it needs to be reversed.
The United Nations has described Yemen as the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with 80% of the people in need of aid. The officials also raised the alarm on a massive shortfall in aid funding for Yemen. The designation freezes any US-related assets of the Houthis, bans Americans from doing business with them, and makes it a crime to provide support or resources to the movement. While the United Nations and aid groups help about a third of Yemen's 28 million people, commercial imports are key to ensuring millions more have access to food. UN aid chief Mark Lowcock has also warned that the US decision would push Yemen into a famine on a scale that's not seen for nearly 40 years.
I am not questioning the intent of the US invocation of the FTO designation. I am answering three questions. First, what is the likely humanitarian impact? The answer is a large-scale famine on a scale that we have not seen for nearly 40 years. Second, would licenses and exemptions for aid agencies prevent that? The answer is no. Third, well, what would prevent it? A reversal of the decision.
Speaking at UNSC meeting on Yemen, India's envoy T.S. Tirumurti highlighted the plight of Yemeni children and said that children suffering in Yemen should move the conscience of the world. The top diplomat assured that India will continue to provide medical and other assistance to those affected by the conflict in Yemen.
The plight of millions of Yemenis facing inter alia severe food insecurity as well as children suffering malnourishment are immediate needs which should move the conscience of the world community. We need to make every effort. India will continue to provide medical and other assistance to those afflicted by the conflict.
Yemen is undergoing the worst famine, which is termed as the largest humanitarian crisis in the world by UNICEF. The decision has sparked fear among Yemenis of being further isolated from the global financial system. Severe inflation has put many basic goods out of reach. Foreign reserves have also dwindled. Many traders fear trade and commercial operations will be paralyzed in a country that imports 90% of its food. Joining us on this broadcast is Jean-Nicolas Bouge, the UNHCR representative in Yemen. Now remember, UNHCR is the UN Refugee Agency. Now, Jean, welcome to WION. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Now, the United Nations has asked the United States of America to reverse its decision of branding Yemen's Houthi rebels as terrorists. So, the basic question I want to ask you for the benefit of our viewers: do the Houthis indulge in terror activities? Should they be branded as terrorists? Is the UN objection purely based on humanitarian needs of the people of Yemen?
For us, the humanitarians, we are mainly concerned about the consequences on the Yemeni population, on the Yemeni private business of this designation. As you mentioned, the country is undertaking a massive, catastrophic humanitarian situation where 8 out of 10 Yemeni depends on our humanitarian aid for their daily survival. With this designation, and depending on the humanitarian exception that will be adopted, we know that we will have difficulties anywhere to import food, medicine, but also shelter material. We are faced with a situation where 1 out of 8 Yemeni has been displaced by the conflict, lost their house, family members, they have lost their livelihood, and if we import humanitarian material, we are risking their life on the basis.
Absolutely. You know, like we just told our viewers that 80% of the population in Yemen, 80% of the people in Yemen depend on some sort of foreign aid for their survival. Yemen imports most amount of its food for its people. So how will this designation, like you were explaining, how will this US designation of Houthis who control part of Yemen, including the capital Sana'a, interrupt the humanitarian efforts that are currently being taken by many countries in Yemen? And like the UN says, this could lead to the largest famine the world has seen in 4 decades. It's a crisis that Yemen is facing. Is the world putting enough efforts to solving this crisis?
For the humanitarian, it will mean that we won't be able to do any business with any private sector business which is related to the Houthi, to the de facto authorities in Sana'a. Which means, for example, using warehouse when we import the food, the medicine, the shelter material, and so on and so forth. That when we will want to truck those humanitarian relief items to the people close to the front line where they need it most, we won't be able to use a Yemeni private business to bring the material to the people. Therefore, it makes our daily interaction with private business, but also with the institution that represent the authorities on the ground in the north, extremely limited and extremely difficult. We need the institution to continue sending children to school. We need to cooperate with the institution to continue providing medical items to health facilities in Yemen. This will not be possible anymore with the designation.
Jean, one final question to you. Could you kindly elaborate on the role played by India and other countries in providing aid to Yemen? Because we just heard the Indian representative say that India will continue to provide aid to those in need and affected by this conflict in Yemen.
India, like many other countries, has supported the United Nations, but also international and national humanitarian NGOs to deliver aid in Yemen and elsewhere in the world. We count on a country like India, which is one of the main power, to continue advocating for first, the end of the conflict, which is really the root causes of all the humanitarian needs that we are trying to address. But secondly, to continue supporting us financially, but also politically, to make sure that we as humanitarians can continue to deliver life-saving intervention in Yemen and elsewhere in the world.
Jean-Nicolas Bouze, thank you so much for joining us on WION and highlighting the plight of the people in Yemen. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.